You're listening to Seminary Dropout, episode 38. This week, we'll talk with blogger Andy Campbell about spiritual disciplines and making room at the table. Plus, we'll talk about the end of the Pretty Big Book giveaway, who the winner was, and my new post, The Essential Reading List for Christ Followers. All right, let's do it. That's right, friends. Like you heard, we're going to be talking with blogger Andy Campbell today. Andy's a good friend of mine. Got to know him over the blogosphere in the last few years, and I've got a great interview coming up with him. Listen, most of you know I had the Pretty Big Book giveaway. It wasn't a giant book giveaway, but it was pretty big. So the winner for that was Adam Lorenz. Adam, thank you for participating. Adam's been a reader for a very long time. And if you guys don't know about this, all you had to do to enter was subscribe to Seminary Dropout, and then let me know about it. Now, I will, and I promise this, I will, and very soon, have another contest that will probably involve you subscribing to Seminary Dropout in iTunes. All that subscribing did a lot of good. At one point, Seminary Dropout was ranked 30, I think it was 34. I think that was the highest under Christianity and podcasts. We were right behind Rick Warren, so that was huge. That was great. We will do that again, and you don't have to wait until the next contest to subscribe. From now on, when we do contests, and when we did this contest, even if you subscribed in the past, you could still enter. So do that. Also, make sure to rate and review. That helps as well. So thanks. Adam's getting 9 books that are some quality books. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to talk about was last week I posted a list that we're all creating together, you as listeners, people who read my blog post, myself. We're going to create a list. What I want to do is, you know how I think it's the American Film Institute has like the top 100 movies ever made. I want to do the same thing for Christian literature, for books for the Christ follower, okay? So if you could go there and if you could post only 3 books, recommend 3 books, what would they be? So go over there, look over the list, go to shaneblackshear.com/essential reading. shaneblackshear.com/essential reading. Look over the list, and it's 2 pages long, so you'll have to scroll down to the bottom and click over to the next page to see all of them. I think we've got like a little over 30 books right now. And so if your book is on there, just don't add it again, just vote it up. You can vote on these. Look through it. If you think there's some that shouldn't be on the list, that, hey, that's a great book but doesn't really deserve to be on a top list, vote it down. We're going to crowdsource this. We're going to come up with the list of the top, and I don't know where we're going to cut it off. I mean, we'll see however long it goes. But, you know, maybe if it's 50 books long, from that we'll take the top 25 and have the top 25 books, because it only takes one person to get a book on the list, and so they may not be one of the best books just because one person added it. So we'll take submissions for a long time, and then I'm just going to ask people to vote on those, to vote them up or vote them down, so that we can kind of equal each other out and come up with a top list of books. So basically, if you read all of these top 25, top 30, 40, however far we go, you would be a pretty well-read person. And so go there, vote, add a book if it's not on there, shaneblackshear.com/essential reading. Would love to have your input. Okay, that's it. I am going to kick it over to the interview with my friend Andy Campbell.
Andy Campbell, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
When I read your blog, I've noticed over time a lot of similarities between your faith journey and my own.
Yeah.
And especially now you're in Portland now.
Yes.
Right? At George Fox. Tell me just a little bit about your role at George Fox.
Yeah, so I work at George Fox Seminary, which is embedded within George Fox University. And George Fox Seminary is, despite its name, is not a Quaker seminary per se. It's a non-denominational seminary. And I actually came to George Fox Seminary as a student working on my doctorate of ministry, and was then later hired to work in the Doctor of Ministry program as one of the administrators. So I handle all of the online learning stuff for the Doctor of Ministry program. I'm also the social media manager for the seminary as a whole, so kind of the real person behind that. And then I wear a bunch of other different hats when it comes to helping with student life and teaching some courses here and there. So kind of eclectic, but mostly working with doctoral students.
Very cool. And you just got your doctorate recently, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I just finished mine up this past spring, so May of 2013, and glad to have that off my plate. You know, doctoral dissertations, I think, are like a lot of projects where you fall in love with them at the beginning, and then you fall out of love with them towards the end. It's pushing on to get it complete. So that's how mine was.
What was your dissertation about?
My dissertation was about spiritual formation and metaphor. So one of the things that I argue in my dissertation is that one of the reasons that people are not connecting with the spiritual disciplines, and I know you had Richard Foster on the show, but one of the reasons people aren't connecting with works like Richard Foster's, Dallas Willard, and some of these titans in spiritual formation is because we as a culture are moving past this modernist understanding of how to be spiritually formed. So instead of stripping mystery out of the process, people want mystery and they want myth. And so I argue that instead of lists of disciplines and steps to formation, we need to return to our roots as a storytelling culture. We need to couch spiritual formation in grand metaphors. And I use the work of a philosopher named Paul Ricoeur to unpack that a little bit in terms of how metaphor works on the level of ideas, not just words and sentences.
I want to backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about your upbringing because like I said, you're in Portland now, but you grew up in Georgia, is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. Was born in Tennessee, but only lived there as an infant and grew up most of my life in Atlanta, Georgia area. That's correct.
And so how old were you when you left there? Was that college, when you went off to college that you left Atlanta?
I actually did my undergraduate work in Georgia still. Okay. In a more rural part of northeast Georgia, Gainesville, Georgia. And I left Georgia in 2002, moved up to Virginia Beach, where I actually was starting a master's degree in theater and ended up transitioning into the seminary at that school, and that was Regent University. And then continued sort of moving up the East Coast. So lived in Philadelphia for a few years and then in Washington, D.C., and saw my faith change each of those subsequent moves. Yeah.
You just did a blog series that was 35 for 35, which was blog post a day leading up to your 35th birthday, 35 posts.
Yeah.
One of the ones that I read, you were talking about the home church that you grew up in, and it was a Southern Baptist church. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. And in fact, your youth minister, Alan Jackson, not the country singer,
right,
is a kind of a big name at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, right, where I went for a very short time.
Yeah.
And so I've met Alan a couple times. When knowing that you are not at that place now, theologically, I was waiting in that blog post for you to throw your church under the bus, so to speak. And that never came.
Yeah.
And which that's a very popular thing to do for people our age, to throw their church upbringing under the bus. And in fact, and you acknowledged, I've moved on from some of these things, but you're really complimentary to that upbringing. And so I guess I'm wondering how do you feel about that upbringing as a 35-year-old looking back on it?
Yeah. Wow, that's a great question. I didn't throw my church under the bus because one, I've already done that. I've done that before in my history. It's never made it on my blog, but certainly was very angry at the way that I was brought up when I was exposed to streams of Christianity that were outside of the realm of what I had been taught or exposed to as a child. But as I started to look back on the things that formed me in my life, I realized that not all of them were good formations, or not all of them could be split into strictly good or strictly bad part of my upbringing. And certainly my church experience was one of those. Theologically, I look back and I have some problems with Southern Baptist theology and the kinds of things that I was brought up believing. But this was a community of people who really loved one another. And I saw some really amazing relationships happen. I formed some friendships with people that I still keep up with to this day. And I keep up with more people, I think, from that church than I do from my own high school. And so there were really solid relationships and real experiences that happened. And just because I've moved out of that theology and I can critique that theology, I think that doesn't give me the right to throw that whole community under the bus. Within their particular context, within that theology, they are doing the best that they know how to do. They are pursuing faithfulness. Now, my definition of faithfulness may critique what that looks like embodied in their community, but for who they are, they're pursuing faithfulness. And I think that that's something that people have to struggle with, especially as they look back in their own upbringing. And that's not going to be everybody's story either. There are certainly some church communities that maybe deserve to be thrown under the bus. I just didn't think that this one was one of those.
Well, I really identified with that because I feel the exact same way, and I feel like a lot of times when I hear people my age telling the stories of those churches that they grew up in, a lot of times there was just a meanness there that wasn't present in my more fundamentalist upbringing.
Yeah.
That there was really a real warmth and love there. And I'm with you. I cannot throw those people under the bus. So I'm wondering if there are some things about that upbringing that you still hold on to that you don't want to let go of.
Yeah, for sure. I still have a respect for Scripture that I can't let go of. Now, I may not use all the same words to describe Scripture that my Southern Baptist upbringing would use. I may get really cagey around words like infallible and inerrant. But in terms of cementing the Scriptures as sort of a corner piece, a lens through which we come to know and understand Jesus and try to figure out what our lives as Christians are supposed to take from as their starting point, I still look to Scripture for that. The great tradition has become more and more important to me as I've grown theologically, but it hasn't yet come to a place where I look as a tradition as being on par with Scripture, as some ecclesiologies and theologies would offer. So that's really important to me. As I have kids now, the idea of having a relationship with Jesus, as hokey as that sounds, even as it comes out of my mouth, becomes more important as well. Because my kids they're old enough, they're 8 and 10, and they're old enough to make their own decisions and start to decide what it is they're going to believe. And I don't want them to grow up in a household. They're going to grow up in a pluralistic culture, but they won't grow up in a pluralistic household. I'm raising my kids to be Christians and to know Jesus personally. And that's something that I still hold on to from my Southern Baptist faith. Now, it's more complex for me than kneeling by the side of the bed and praying the sinner's prayer.
Yeah.
I did that like 36 times before I was 18.
Yeah.
But this idea that, you come to a place where you own your faith, whether that's through a conversion moment like I had when I was 7 years old and decided to get baptized, or you just always grow up knowing Jesus, which is the story of my older daughter. She can't look back to a place where she didn't know anything but Jesus. But to me, there will still come a day where she needs to make that her own, where she takes the faith that she's been handed and she makes that her own. And that's the kind of conversionism that is stressed, I think, in the Southern Baptist faith. It might make my Southern Baptist relatives nervous if she can't point to her, spiritual birthday.
Yeah.
But the importance of making the decision to be a Christian, whether that's through conversion or adoption, I think is still something that I find important. Yeah.
Going back to your story, so you went to Virginia Beach and you were pursuing acting. So tell me, what was your plan when you were pursuing acting? Did you think you were going to be an actor professionally? And then what happened that made you decide to switch to a seminary track?
Yeah. So when I went off to college for my undergrad, I'll backtrack just a little bit. I received a scholarship to act in one of the premier acting schools, acting programs in the state. And at that point in my life, there was, and this is part of that Southern Baptist upbringing, but there was a very clear delineation between sacred and secular. And so the message that I received was that the only way that I could really be an actor and a Christian is if I was to put my gifts into use in some overtly Christian way. So I could be part of a church drama troupe, or I could make Christian movies, or something along those lines. But if I wanted to do secular acting, then I was going to have to struggle with my faith. So I felt pulled in two directions, and I chose to go down the route of secular acting, which I thought then meant that I needed to abandon my faith, which I did for 3 years. I came back to faith sort of late in college, and part of that was this realization that there is no sacred and secular in the way that I had understood it to be, but rather God calls people of faith to fully inhabit and embody all sorts of things without that sort of distinction, and that theater was one of those. And I thought, man, this would have been really helpful if I'd known this entering in. Maybe I wouldn't have had some of the struggles that I did. So I resolved to sort of be the person that I didn't have for me when I was in college in terms of a Christian mentor in theater. And the only way I knew forward to do that was by becoming a theater professor. I did not have exposure to campus ministry. That was not a paradigm. There wasn't campus ministry activity on my college campus. And so I said, well, the way I can best influence these young Christian actors is to become a professor, and then I can kind of ferret them out, and we can have these discussions on the side about what it means to be a Christian and to be involved in the arts. So I started looking at graduate programs within the fine arts. A Master of Fine Arts is a terminal degree, so there's not a doctorate above that. So you can teach on the university level with an MFA. And that was my plan, was to get an MFA and then to start applying for assistant professor positions. And I came across Regent University really because they had a robust script writing program. And they were entering into all sorts of one-act play competitions and winning awards with both their performance and their writing. I didn't really want to write, but it drew my attention to this Christian-oriented approach to higher education and acting. And so I applied and was accepted into that program. And I started in that program not understanding fully what kind of school Regent University was, only came later to find out that it was sort of the brainchild of Pat Robertson and an outgrowth of CBN. Was walking across campus one day and ended up in the library in the lobby and saw a pamphlet for their seminary. And I'd never really thought about going to seminary before, but I opened up this pamphlet, and in one of those rare moments in life where I felt God actually speaking to me, I understood that the seminary was the real reason that I was supposed to be there. And it didn't make any sense. I had no desire to be a pastor or a missionary. I mean, those things were not in my framework in terms of what I wanted to do vocationally. But I took that pamphlet home to the apartment my wife and I were living in at the time, and I sat down on the bed with her and I showed her this pamphlet, and I said, I think this is why we're here. And she paused for a moment, and she read through the pamphlet, and she said, this is kind of weird, but I think you're right. So I went into the admissions office. Classes for the fall were about to start. I'd taken some summer courses to go ahead and get a jump on some of the coursework for theater. And I went into the admissions office in the seminary, sat down with the admissions rep, and was just wondering if there's a way I could transfer my enrollment from theater into the seminary. And he looked at my transcripts and he said, that shouldn't be a problem. And he said, now, we're a renewal theology seminary. That's not going to be a problem, is it? And I said, no, that's not going to be a problem. And I had no idea what renewal theology was. And for our listeners, renewal theology is short for charismatic renewal theology, which interprets the Bible to say that as we come closer to the second coming of Christ, we will see more and more signs and miracles and evidence of gifts of the Spirit like they saw in Acts 2 and Acts chapter 3. And there are theological tomes that have been written on this. And I had no idea what this meant until I was in a spiritual formation class, and we went to pray. and people started speaking in tongues. And I was looking around saying, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And it was a good experience for me overall, but it was just very, it was different than Southern Baptist. And it was stretching for me academically. I think one of the things that this particular school had going for them at this time was they had this academic intellectual chip on their shoulders. A lot of folks that are coming out of charismatic or Pentecostal background struggle with anti-intellectualism. There are a lot of independent charismatic churches that are led by people that don't even have a high school diploma, much less a college or seminary degree. And I think to be players on the worldwide theological stage, Regent University or Regent Seminary decided that they wanted to be academically rigorous, that it wasn't just good enough for them to be academically on par with most seminaries, that they really needed to be in the elite in terms of how strenuous they were. So it was stretching for me. I learned a lot there. It kind of galvanized me, I think, in terms of the direction that I was moving, which was away from fundamentalism and dispensationalism and toward, I'm still not sure what yet, but it kind of solidified that trajectory for me. So that's how I ended up at Regent. Was there for just over 2 years and got a degree in practical theology from them.
How did you get to George Fox from there?
Yeah, so the route from there was a bit circuitous. I was looking for jobs towards the end of my seminary career. I'd planted a church that at the time didn't know, but later on came to identify that it was part of the emerging church movement, though it was never part of the emerging church network of churches, but was certainly influenced by the Ooze and a couple other early emerging church bulletin board kind of websites. But that church plant, we didn't have any money, or we couldn't pay anybody, and I had an infant daughter and wife, and was really looking for something that was more vocationally ministry. So was just kind of looking around online for jobs. I had a campus ministry organization based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, called the Coalition for Christian Outreach. They contacted me and wondered if I would do campus ministry in Philadelphia. They were opening up this new territory and were looking for people that would be entrepreneurial and create a campus ministry. And they told me I could pick any campus in Philadelphia I wanted. Philadelphia has the second largest concentration of college campuses of any metropolitan area in the U.S. So that was a big pool to pick from. And there in Philadelphia, there are a couple of art schools. And so I quickly focused in on the University of the Arts as a place where I could do campus ministry, and kind of circle back around to this desire to want to be a Christian mentor or discipler or whatever you want to call it for young people who were looking in what it means to be a Christian and an artist at the same time. So I did that for 3 years, and then I was the area director of that region for a little while. Eventually went to the Washington, D.C. area to continue doing campus ministry work. Was hired on staff at a mega church in just outside of Washington, D.C., and oversaw all of their small groups for a while. And it was in that context that I started work on my Doctor of Ministry, really sort of leaning into this vocational pursuit of ministry, and thought that that's where my life was going to be headed. And then 8 or 9 months into that particular role, they determined that I was not a good fit at the church anymore, and they disinvited me to continue my employment there. And so I was kind of in the middle of this doctoral program and really unsure of what to do next. I'd based my doctoral research up to that point on developing some new programs for that particular church. And so kind of scrapped all that. At about the same time, was asked to consider this job out at George Fox. And it worked out for my family and I to kind of pick up and move right out to Portland. And we've been here just over 2 years, and still, struggling with how things ended at that church job and what that means for the future for me, and whether or not working in higher education is, going to be the thing that I do long term or not. But that's sort of how I ended up out in Portland. Love it in Portland, but man, it is far away from Atlanta.
You going back to you had told a story on another post of your blog about in your early 20s coming across these streams of spiritual formation, talking about how you connected with them, and then also having this weird guilt because most of these writers are Catholic writers, and then you discovering Richard Foster. Talk about what it's like coming from that world that is extremely genuine, but slightly myopic, and then coming across someone like Richard Foster and having, in some ways, for me, it kind of felt like my eyes were open for the first time. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, there were a couple different reactions that I had because before Foster, I think I stumbled across Thomas Merton and was just so struck by his writings and his ability to describe what was happening inside of me. And Brennan Manning as well, another Catholic writer who, those guys, it was like they were reading my mail. They were describing my deepest heart's longings. And I wasn't, at that point, I wasn't even sure that they were Christian, because there was this suspicion I'd been brought up with that, unless you have prayed this particular prayer and unless you've been baptized as an adult in response to that prayer, and that you couldn't be a Christian, and that these people who were worshiping Jesus's mother and not Jesus, like, are those people even Christian? And so I was very close-minded. Just I didn't have much of a frame of reference for what Christianity looked like outside of Baptist Christianity. So I read these guys and I felt very conflicted at first because they were so accurately describing what I felt God was doing in my life and the things that I longed for from God. But at the same time, I wasn't even sure that they were meaning the same thing when I talked about God and I read their words. So I was really conflicted. And then when I became convinced that, no, these people, they're genuine, that they're describing the same faith that I'm trying to practice and live out, then honestly, I was pissed at my church. I was pissed at my tradition for making these sweeping claims that it held, access to all that we needed in terms of the Christian life, and for putting down the Catholic Church and causing the kind of suspicion that it caused, that I had, certainly. I was angry. I was angry that these streams that Richard Foster writes about had been hidden from me. And I forget where I read it. I don't think it was Foster, but some author I was reading said that once he understood the great tradition to be a great tradition, then all of a sudden it didn't matter where the Christian practice stemmed from, because if it was in the great tradition, it was part of his tradition, part of his practice. So then I didn't feel like I was cheating on my Baptist upbringing with a different faith. Once I understood that my Baptist upbringing was a stream, and it's a stream that's contributed its own beneficial things, but I could look outside of that stream into other rivulets in this great river and be able to sail on those for a little while as well. So then it was very eye-opening to me, and Foster was really my guide through that. And a lot of the stuff put out by Renovare Press has been incredibly helpful and practical to me as I've, grown and changed. Yeah.
One of your more popular posts, and a more recent one, was the myth of extending the table.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about what that metaphor means for those who haven't read the post. And then talk to me a little bit about what you mean by that, what the post is about.
Yeah, so the post was really coming out of some conversations I was having with some of my friends who are not white males. And we were talking about how late in the game non-white, non-male folks are usually invited into conversation, whether that's planning an event or forming an organization or even just exploring what it would be like to plant a church. And, I think that there's this, from dominant culture perspective, there's this idea, this notion that we want to sort of extend the table to our brethren that are not like us. And in that post, I was just pointing out that that's sort of this fallacious assumption that, that the table is this flexible metaphor, this flexible thing, and we can just pull up other seats. When usually what happens when we invite someone else to the table, when we're extending that table, is that we've already set the table, determined what's going to be prepared for dinner and who's going to sit where. And when we invite people late to the game, the metaphor or the image that I use is it's like, pulling up a folding chair, on the corner of the table. That really what needs to happen is, instead of extending the table, we need to have a commitment to inviting other people into helping create the table. And that's really what that post was about, that the table's not something that can be extended, but it's something that's remade and reset every time we approach it. And that if we're really committed to being a organization or a people or a church or whatever that's more diverse, that includes opinions that are not our own, then you invite those perspectives in from day one. You don't wait until day 10 or 15 or until you realize, oh my gosh, we've been tarrying along and we're all a bunch of white guys. We should probably have people that aren't white here or people that aren't male here. That at that stage in the game, it's almost too late, unless you're willing to invite those voices in and say, listen, this is what we've done up to this point, but everything's on the table. We're ready to go back to square one because we realized that we went out of the starting gate and we were not committed or living out the commitment to the diversity that we said that we were. So we're ready to start over with different voices involved as well. That post resonated with a lot of folks, and it was quickly became my most viewed and most commented on post. A lot of the stuff is sort of very affirmative, and some people giving some good pushback about what that means practically, and certainly I understand what some of that pushback is. I work within an institution that has a commitment to diversity, but you look at our faculty and staff, and it certainly doesn't look like we're making good on that. And partly is because it's a lot more difficult to put into practice than it is to put on paper. But I think if we can correct this idea that the table is something that is infinitely extendable, and that as long as you have a voice that's not like yours at the table at some point, that's good enough, then I think that we can start to make the kind of adjustments that we need to make to really live up to these values of diversity that we say we have, or inclusion, or justice, or however we want to put that.
I want to move on and talk about some of your writings. I mentioned earlier you had so generously invited me to contribute to a book that you're helping put together on fatherhood.
Yeah, so the book is part of a series called I Speak for Myself. This series was born out of a book by two Muslim women who are American. They've grown up in America, and they were really just struck that the American understanding of what it means to be Muslim is fairly narrow. And these two young women decided to gather some of their friends and colleagues together and write essays showing what a varied experience it is to be Muslim in America, and especially a woman. And so in that volume, there were 40 women that contributed, all under the age of 40. And that book really resonated with their audience, and so they decided to turn it into a series and to look at different faiths and different gender to talk about their faith. And so they asked me if I would edit a volume on American Christian men. They said we want it to be something where you use some sort of topic to revolve around looking at the Christian faith through American male lens. And so, being a father myself and reflecting a lot on my relationship with my own father, and then understanding that, one of the ways that we talk about God in the Christian faith is as Father, I kind of chose that as a topic and started inviting other voices in. So the book is 40 essays from 40 different Christian men in America who are all 40 years old or younger. And it really is a varied look at fatherhood, relationships with fathers, the anticipation of being a father, and the notion of God as Father through the eyes of these different men. One of the things that I'm really excited about in terms of the book is just the number of different social and cultural and theological perspectives that are represented there. Worked really hard to make sure that there are a lot of different voices. And even as I'm writing the introduction, I'm trying to reinforce that, this series is called I Speak for Myself. And so there are contributions in there where the reader will disagree with the author's understanding of what it means to be a Christian, or will disagree with their understanding of what it means to be a father. And I think that's great. And, I think if I could gather all 40 of these guys in a room together, there would be some really intense debates among the contributors as well. And each of these essays sort of stands on its own. And that's one of the beauties of the book as a compilation, is that it comes at it from so many different angles and so many different perspectives.
Very cool. Well, I'm excited about it. And is it due next Father's Day? Is that right?
It's going to be next fall. We'd hope to have it out by next Father's Day.
Okay.
And as is common with a lot of these projects, the dates get pushed back. And so we're looking at a fall 2014 release on the book. Yeah.
Cool. So we'll definitely be talking about that on our blogs.
Yeah.
And so you're working on something, or maybe you haven't finished, spiritual formation and home brewing?
Yeah. So that's kind of this project that's been birthed out of my work on metaphor and spiritual formation. As part of that, I wrote a book manuscript that uses the process of homebrewing beer as this metaphor through which we can view spiritual formation. So I've been brewing beer for 7 years now, almost 7 years, six and a half years. And I love the process of brewing beer. I like being able to make my own beer and drink it and give it to friends. And every time I would brew beer, I was struck with how calming that rhythm was to me, and the interplay between the activity that I was undertaking and then these long periods of waiting in the brewing process and the fermentation process. And that got me to thinking about, monks brewed beer. In fact, some of the finest beer in the world is still brewed in monasteries today. And I'm sure that they could have chosen to make cheese or chocolate or any, other kind of food product, but there's a reason that they chose beer. So in this book, I basically teach the reader how to homebrew beer, and I make little pit stops along the way talking about the ingredients and the process and what we can learn about our own lives, especially our spiritual lives, from the ingredients and the process. And that manuscript is with a publisher now, and they're considering taking that on as a project. So that might be my next writing project. But it was fantastic to write the manuscript and be able to sort of unpack some of these ideas and really weave my own spiritual story and what I see God doing as sort of a normative part of people's lives into this tapestry that talks about beer and water and hops and yeast. And it was a really interesting project.
Well, I'm excited about that. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
Andy, is there anything else that you want to share with us before we go?
No, I think that the series that you're doing, the whole Seminary Dropout podcast, is just a really amazing idea, and I've enjoyed listening to the interviews. And I'm somebody that works in a seminary, and my livelihood kind of depends on people not wanting to drop out of seminary. But I think the seminary world is changing, higher education is changing, and from where I sit, it's an exciting time to be looking at seminary, whether that's getting your education and your input and ideas through your podcast, or coming to a place like George Fox Seminary. I think it's an exciting time to be talking about the future of the faith and the future of church. Yeah.
And it's so good to finally, I would say, talking in person. This is the closest we've gotten. But man, I just so appreciate everything you do online and your words, and I hope more people go and check it out.
Thank you so much, Shane. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to Andy Campbell for being on the show today. As always, you can find all the links to Andy's material, Andy's blog, on the show notes for this show. You can get there by going to shaneblackshear.com/Andy. It'll all be right there. Well, we've done it again, folks. We've done another episode of Seminary Dropout. As always, please, I will remind you, if you like this show, if you would like to see its success, go to iTunes, give us a rating and or review, and especially make sure that you subscribe in iTunes. That helps oh so much. One last thing, I'm going to give a shout out to the Praxis Conference that's going to be June 6th and 7th in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm going to be there. If you're going to be there, hey, shoot me a line. I'd love to know. I'd love to see you in person. I know a few of our favorite people are going to be there. Sarah Bessie, Jonathan Martin, Brian Zahn, who's going to be in Seminary Dropout pretty soon. They're all going to be there. It's going to be an amazing conference. I'm looking forward to it. All right, other than that, thanks to interstitial music from DL Rossi, fantastic musician. Okay, friends, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.
And you turn the other cheek, so I could live, oh live. Oh, if the gospel is Jesus, then you can call me Judas, because I've turned my